Demons, angels, and Nephilim, the abandoned children of unseen gods. These should seem like fairly familiar tales, especially due to how often they get twisted into games with a darker aesthetic. Hellslave 2 is no exception, combining a story you'd almost expect from the Diablo universe with a gritty aesthetic akin to a demonic twist on Darkest Dungeon. It is exactly what you'd want to see in a dungeon-crawling sequel to its already successful predecessor. And overall, I would say that Hellslave 2 hits its mark exceptionally well, taking almost every aspect of the original game and taking it up to the next tier, with tons of skills, more variety in build combinations, a larger world to explore, better map navigation, etc., while simultaneously keeping the turn-based fatigue system from the original's combat and the layers of strategies it creates. And as far as the spoiler-free opinion of the story goes, I would say it's on par with the original, just packed into a game that's about twice as long with a few more story beats. There are, of course, parts I prefer more and parts I like less, but that's going to be true of the ebbs and flows of any game story. Though to save people from spoilers, I will save detailed nitpicks for the end of the video, but while playing Hellslave 1 will let you appreciate the story more, you do not have to play it before the sequel to know what's going on, so if you're curious about that, we've got that squared away. Now visually, as you can likely already tell from the footage in the background, this game leans heavily into the horns, spikes, and pointy bits aesthetic, along with the dark, bold outlines of a gritty, ink-heavy style. The game continues this throughout, much like its predecessor, but intersperses it with bits of vegetation, sun-baked deserts, and even actually inhabited cities. I think probably the closest parallel I can make would be, again, Diablo, with Hellslave 2 taking a slightly less dark but still gritty approach, much like we saw with the transition from Diablo 1 to Diablo 2. Though, speaking of Diablo 2, there were literally times while playing this that I did the whole DiCaprio meme pointing at the screen, because there are what feel like obvious nods to the music of Diablo 2, especially mirroring the music you'd find in Acts 2 and 3. This made me exceptionally happy, and while no individual tracks will be hummed in my head, it did keep me in a good space for enjoying the combat, exploring dungeons, and even sometimes idling while I scribbled down notes between sessions. And if you're interested in checking out those reactions as they happened, I am working on making my reviews with receipts, and have uploaded the entirety of the playthrough over on Let's Play Everything, so you can get a better idea of where this review is coming from, as well as others beginning to end. That said, digging into the nitty-gritty, while I've gushed so far and really did enjoy the game a ton, there is no perfect game, no matter how much you love it, and this is no exception. Probably the biggest issue is also one the first game shared on release, and that's bugs. These are expected from ambitious indie titles in general, and the developer has been good at patching the ones I've reported so far, though I'm sure people will find others. I only ran into 2 progression blocking ones, and while I found workarounds for my playthrough, they were both patched even before I started writing this. Same goes for some placeholder images lingering in the pre-release press version. The combat also has some pros and cons, though mostly in the front of what kind of player you are and how you like your encounters handled. Instead of the warning system of the original, Hellslave 2 has real-time movement and enemies on the map, so you can actually dodge most of the encounters. Though early on, you don't want to, so it's not an issue. But if you backtrack, you might find it difficult to avoid them in some areas, leading to unnecessary but easy fights that can burn up time because it is a turn-based system. This is compounded by level limits on what gives you experience. If an enemy is more than 4 levels lower than you, you'll get nothing from the fight other than some random loot. This generally left me wishing there was a way to just auto-resolve battles on the travel map if enemies were significantly lower level than you, since waypoints still often left you traveling through hostile areas with ducking and dodging. That said, there are also big reasons to not go after enemies that are a lot higher level than you too, since higher levels mean that you're less likely to hit them, and the loot that you get from them will be unequipable until you reach their level, though you can use that hit chance aspect against enemies as well by out-leveling certain tough encounters if you want, but with a level cap of 50, you'll only be able to do that so far in, and it won't work in the post-game bonus dungeon at all. Now, the complexity of battle feels a lot more interesting in this one, and the enemies enemies do force you to change up your strategy from time to time, especially whenever it comes to bosses and mini-bosses. Though much like the first game, I was able to find my cheat code strategy, namely you can't die if you can't get hit. Though admittedly, some enemies had ways to bypass that trick, so it wasn't guaranteed success, it just made a lot of encounters a little bit easier for me. That said, overall the encounters felt generally fair, outside of maybe a couple of overtuned bosses, though sometimes that was just bad RNG on my part. Though it does have a few that are strategy and stat checks, they're never so severe that you can't just luck your way through them after a few tries. Some may dislike the lack of a severe death penalty in this respect, so I do hope there is eventually a hardcore mode, but for now, it's just up to you if you want to play that way or not. I personally found it kind of refreshing that I didn't have to clear an entire dungeon again to get to my bosses. That said, one system I cannot complain about, it basically related to the battles, is the skill system, with what basically amounts to 3.5 skill trees. 2 of them with passive boons, 1 of them being your active skills, and the half essentially being a single power you modify through a few choices you get by exploring. At first it may seem like this is a lot to keep track of, but due to how it's rolled out, it's easy to stay on top of, and you can swap them out as you please, and even keep specific loadouts saved for later. It's user-friendly, and it greatly encourages experimentation with builds. I think the only irk people will find in this system is that there's actually a decent amount of overlap on skill trees. The warrior classes have much the same skills as each other, just arranged drastically differently, and the same is for the sorcerer classes, but those diverge just as quickly due to paths through the trees being extremely different. Another cool thing about the skill system though is, for the most part, the enemies use a lot of the same skills as you, meaning outside of a few select situations, if you see an enemy do something cool, there's probably a build combo you can set up to do the same, which is something I wish more games did, since it really drives home the fact that you are a powerful entity fighting other powerful entities. Add on top of that the equipment system with a lot of slots, as well as runes you can add to most pieces of gear and scrolls for the rest, and you can also usually do a lot of these tricks of mirroring enemies and crank them up to 11. Or even do quirky builds that win through unorthodox methods not even tied to normal skills. And while all this is cool, the world travel on the flip side feels oddly generic instead, despite it being more advanced than the first game, with it feeling much more in line with standard RPGs, while the original game felt more like you were exploring zones in a TTRPG. They did, however, add collectibles such as coin purses and treasure chests, as well as some progression collectibles and side quests. So you do have more stuff to mess with. I just felt more intrigued by the navigation of the first game. But since this has more to do outside of the dungeons, this does work better for that particular scope of the game. Probably the last major gameplay element outside of maybe the post-game purgatory system would actually be the controls. These feel better than the original, though due to animations and such, they can feel slightly sluggish if you're just wanting to spam commands quickly. But if you're planning your turns, you won't notice this. But that said, I 100% recommend playing with a keyboard and mouse, since the controller mode, while functional, definitely has that Atlas vibe, or simply put, the buttons work properly, do what's intended, but it's not the standard layout you're used to from other games, so it will feel a little bit unintuitive until you get used to it after a while. Though controller as an option is great for users of Steam Decks or Steam Link type setups. Now, you might have noticed right there I did mention a post-game, which I'm personally saving to play on stream rather than for this review. But from the look of the first level of it, it comes across more akin to a roguelite mode, but with enemies that are stronger than even the core game, with a goal of reaching certain floors in pursuit of achievements and challenging your build. The first enemy I fought, for example, had more life than even the final boss of the game, and that was just floor 1. But it looks like a fun thing to play around with and sort of use as a challenge-focused victory lap, especially since it has enemies I don't remember seeing in the rest of the game. Now, all that said, if you want to avoid spoilers, this is where you should probably head out, after doing all the YouTube mumbo-jumbo, of course. Since you already know I enjoyed the game, even with its bit of indie janky c'est quoi, I guess we could call it. It may not win Game of the Year for me, but it definitely gets a, you should play this if you like turn-based RPGs with a dark gothic theme. Now, the reason we kicked the spoiler group out is I wanted to talk a bit about the story, even if just in a vague posty sort of way. Overall, I liked it, and the concepts it placed forth. It was, unfortunately, very much on rails, with most decisions for you being strategic, but that was true of the first game as well. though I do oddly feel like it didn't quite land as heavily as the first game. Since the first Hellslave was much more morally ambiguous and gray, this one has you as still a bit of an asshole, but you are very much the reluctant hero trope, and you're going after demons in a bid to save the world from being purged by Archon fire, which, if you're curious, is a result of what happened in Hellslave 1 and its subsequent corruption. A lot of lore is also buried away in notes, which do help expand the world in spite of its laboring over proper nouns that make it a bit harder to read through in one go, though this is also a problem with some great literature like Dune, or an even more popular example, Tolkien. This does cause them to feel a bit word salady unless you want to invest the time to deep dive into the lore. Thankfully, it's also not necessary to understand the story. You rescue someone, you defeat a corrupted Archon, basically a fallen angel, and you learn the fate of the world, which just so happens to be now. To save the world from this fate, you need to kill all the greater demons as they plot to gain ultimate power themselves. As you'd expect, this means beating up world leaders and a couple big dudes in addition to that. The plot is fairly predictable in that, but not in a bad way, and it does foreshadow which sacrifices you'll need to make for the most part, though admittedly, it does belabor it from time to time, and the ending feels a bit exposition dumpish if you go through all the dialogue options at least. But I have a feeling this will be polished a bit post-release, plus you don't really need to listen to all these options to understand what's going on, since they do overlap a bit, making it feel like they're different explanations for similar things. All that said, I think this game could have been about 3/4 as long and been just as effective, though I admittedly also went through and did all but one of the side quests and completed gathering all the odds and ends, so that likely added to the length for me without adding much story outside of the growth of some lore. And the one quest I missed was bugged because I was trying to break the game in the process of playing it, so I spent extra time on it. But again, it is likely fixed in release. But as I said before, I still loved playing through it, even though it did consume my weekend with nearly 30 hours in 2 days, and probably I should do the last shilling of the video before we run out of this. If you want to watch these ad-free, patrons get them same day ad-free for $1 a month. And yeah, keep gaming, have fun, peace out. This has been Alzorath. Bye.